I'm Ariel Azor, host of Right This Way, and today we're going to talk about the importance of congressional term limits. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about how Congress works and sort of the structure of it, because I think a lot of people, especially my age, are going to be just a little bit lacking in knowledge about that because my understanding, what I learned, I had a great history teacher, I loved him, but I did not really learn too much in depth about structure of government. And I think a lot of kids my age or kids that went to my school, any of those things probably also learned the same. That's, we have American history. We study that pretty broadly when we study how the government actually works. And we don't really focus on Congress too much. Congress is a bicameral legislature, which means it's split into two separate parts. So you're not just a member of Congress. That's really broad. You can actually be a member of the House or a member of the Senate. I mean, you are, if you're either one, you're also a member of Congress, but it's not simply that broad. So you can be a representative, which is a member of the House, or you can be a senator, which is a member of the Senate. To serve in the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old, and to serve in the House, you have to be at least 25 years old. These things don't really matter because we have almost no turnover in Congress, in the House or the Senate. It's very, very uncommon that we see somebody this young going into Congress, getting elected, because they have anywhere from 90 to 98% reelection rate for the incumbent, which means if the person already has that position, every 2 years there's an election. If that person already has that position, 90 to 98% of the time, they're reelected. So it's very difficult for somebody to run an adequate campaign to beat somebody who has been in that seat for 30, 40 years. And that's what we see with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Maxine Waters. These people have been here for so long. It's a life career almost for them. And it's not really something that we want. Again, we'll get into some of the details about why we don't want that and what's bad about career politicians. But we'll talk a little bit more about how the Senate and the House work first. The Senate is comprised of 100 senators in total. That's all there will ever be because every state, 50 states, has 2 senators that are there to represent them in Congress. The House of Representatives is a little different. It's based off population size. There are 435 voting representatives in the House. And that's because each state has a certain number based off their population, basically. A state that has a lower population is only going to have a few, whereas a state that is very highly populated is going to have a couple more. And it's based off, I think, 1 to every 30,000. But the maximum number is 435, and they voted on that more than once. So it's not just like, we have another 30,000 people that have come to this state and we get another. It doesn't work that way. It has to be sort of spread out. So the number does not exceed 435. So it's super important to understand how Congress works and why it works the way it does. But we come to a problem when we see no term limits. Because what we know about politicians that is pretty much a fact across the board is that politicians that spend too much time in politics are super corrupt. People, the American people don't trust politicians. They don't like them, but they accept them because it's sort of become this thing that we just accept. Well, too much time in Washington, it does that to you. Yeah, of course it does. But we don't have to accept that. As the American people with the rights to vote that we have every 4 years for president, every 2 years for members of Congress. But it becomes really, really difficult to vote them out because of the rules. So a little bit of history here. The presidential position and Congress, all the positions, none of them in the Constitution originally had term limits. George Washington, the first president, he served 2 terms, and then he said, you know what? No, I'm not running for election again. I'm not up. This is not, I shouldn't be in this position. You should not have it for too long. This much power for one person is not something that should be held for too long. Very wise man. So when we look at Congress, we had the same issue that the Constitution did not put a term limit in there, but there was not one person who was super wise and, super loved this country and more than his position to say, well, you know what, that makes sense. We shouldn't have the opportunity to be here forever either. We should definitely have term limits. And so I think it was sort of overlooked because when George Washington said that, it did not immediately become law that the president cannot occupy the presidential position for more than 2 terms. But eventually, we had a couple presidents after him that also ran for 3rd term, and none of them were elected until Roosevelt was elected for his 3rd term. So after Roosevelt, we did not have any more presidents that served more than 2 terms. They only served 2 terms. It was eventually passed into law. Presidents can only serve 2 terms. But again, we totally overlooked Congress, and there was nothing ever done there. So historically, it wasn't our first president that put this into law. It was after that. So, I don't see why it's too late, especially with how bad it's gotten recently with the political divide, with the people that are in Congress, I think are just absolutely terrible people to be in Congress for as long as they've been there. These people have been in there since Clinton's impeachment. And you're still there. That was before I was born. It was never really designed for people to hold this position of power for so long. And the reasoning behind, I think, not putting a term limit was that they didn't want to limit. If the American people love this person leading them and they can agree on this, and this is a way to bring them together politically and to serve them if they're serving them. And I think the idea was we've given them all the power to vote them out of office. And of course they absolutely have. But people aren't voting them out of office. And why is that? Because these politicians are super crafty, and because with social media and the media being so political nowadays and all of these things and access to social media and all of that, they have so much power that they didn't have in the past. Because in the past, if Joe Biden was walking around campaigning and he wasn't on TV every day, you could just hear him on the radio, it's something, but you really have to listen to what he's saying. You can't just, look at him and be like, oh, that's Joe. He was Obama's VP. We loved Obama. Let's do it. They'd be looking at Joe and listening to Joe and saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Joe can't remember what state he's in. He can't remember where he's going next. He can't even remember what office he's running for, let alone be president of the United States. And things were different because the campaign was completely different. Campaigns have changed so much, so radically over just the last 10, 20, 30 years that I don't think it's the same sort of thing that the founding fathers had in mind. And again, I know a lot of people say, well, it's not a problem. It's never been a problem before. It absolutely has been a problem before. But people are getting really tired of it, and people are starting to really see an issue with it. And so what happens is it becomes really, really difficult to vote somebody out of Congress, not vote them out, but to vote somebody else in if they're the incumbent, because the rate that an incumbent is reelected is like 90 to 98% of the time. If you are the incumbent, you are reelected. So it's very rare that, unless they just say, I'm not running for office again, it's very rare that the incumbent does not win that election. So even if somebody, some new blood is trying to come into Congress, they don't want them there. These people know the system. That's the issue. These people know the system. They know how to work it in Congress. It was never designed to be very difficult to understand. The American people, it was meant to be transparent so the American people could understand. And if the American people can understand how it works, our lawmakers, whose job it is to understand how it works, can definitely figure it out if they're there for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever their term limit becomes 8 years. But there has to be a limit. We have so many people who've been in here so long. And the problem with that, again, is they're not looking to serve the American people. That's the thing, is if you're not really campaigning anymore, you don't have to try. You don't try in your job. The whole job is to serve the American people and to vote. You are representatives of the states. You are senators of the states. No matter what position you hold in Congress, you represent the state that you're there to represent. And so, in effect, you represent the people of that state that you're there to represent, of course. And these people aren't doing that anymore. They're not doing what's in the best interest of the people of their state. Let's look at California again. I know I always pick on California, but it's so easy to see. It's super hard to disagree that the politicians of California do not care about Californian people. And you say, well, what are you talking about? They do all these things for homeless people. No. Homeless people flock to California because their laws are so loose, because they can do, get free things, do what they want. And of course the weather, I mean, that definitely plays a factor, but they're flocking to California. San Francisco streets are covered in human feces because police officers should be used to say, you know what, you can't actually use the street as a bathroom. We're really sorry. We're really nice here in California, but we draw the line there. That is so reasonable. And if you think that the politicians of California really care about the people, you have to look again. What are they doing? What are their policies doing to the people of California, to the businesses in California? And it's not hard to see. Again, the incumbent, once you're there, it's really difficult to get them out. You have to really, really screw up or be super, super old, or, that's really just about it. You have to seriously screw up to get out. That's pretty much it. And that's the problem, is that's never the way it was designed to be. And, you can say, well, of course it is, but that's the way they designed it. No, they definitely overlooked things. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. That's why we have amendments, is because things were overlooked. No matter how great and how amazing the founding fathers were to put the Constitution together, and how much thought they put into it, and were able to do such a great job on the first try, seriously wasn't that great. Nothing on the first try. A first draft is never perfect. And that was the thing. And I think it was just overlooked because they had bigger things to worry about. And I think it's been overlooked for so long. But, now is the time we should be concerned about people spending 30, 40, 50 years in office. Nancy Pelosi is 80 years old, and she has served in Congress she's on her 17th term, so about 34 years by the time she's up for re-election again. Chuck Schumer is 69, and he has served 39 years in office at the end of his current term. Maxine Waters is 81 years old, and she's served a total of 30 years in Congress, which again, we're looking at 30, 40, 50 years. These are people that have been there for a very, very long time and are current members of Congress. But I have a nice little list of who has served the longest in Congress, and they're probably not names you're going to recognize, but their political party is very interesting. My list orders people from the most years they've served in Congress to the lowest, just, in order of who has served the longest, counting from the highest to the least. So from 1, the highest, to 10. The top 10 longest serving members of Congress are all Democrats. The top 10. And they served, the longest was 59 years. And out of those 10, the lowest was 48 years. That's, 1, they're all Democrats, and 2, that is a crazy amount of time. I just wanted to bring that up because I didn't want anybody to think I was exaggerating when I'm saying 40, 50, 60 years. They're seriously people serving in Congress for this long, and it's not something that's just started happening now. It's been an issue for a very long time. And so these people, half of them retired, which is crazy because they must have been super old, and half of them died in office. They've served for so long that they're dying in office. Only one of them lost the renomination, and I don't know what the circumstances were, but that's crazy. These people are dying in office, and I'm not making this up. I'll probably link this when I put this episode up, so you guys can look at this too, because it's actually super interesting. These people that have served for so long, they're all Democrats. It takes from 1 to 10, every single one of the longest serving Congress members of the top 10 are Democrats. And, you see Republicans. At 11, we reach one. The first one that's a Republican was a Democrat and a Republican. So I don't know how that worked, but he served as both. This was from 1902 to 2003, which is crazy because, these people, these weren't super old. This wasn't in the 1800s. One of them was 1800 to 1972, 1877 to 1972. But, most of them, I mean, the current dates for most of them, they were like they resigned or died in 2019, 2010, 2012, 1995, 2019, 1981, 1981, 1961, 2000. So the majority of these are also super current or relatively current in the history of American politics. They're relatively current, even if they're not, the last 20 or 30 years even, they're still, they're pretty relevant. So I just wanted to bring that up again so you can understand the people I'm talking about. It's not just Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, that I want out of office or anything like that. It's that I honestly think term limits would make such a difference in Congress in getting things done. I mean, you shouldn't have career politicians that are in the same position that have the exact same job. You should just never. It's never a good thing. They should not do that for more than like 10 years or so. I mean, it's crazy because they get so used to what they're doing. They get so corrupt. I don't think that anybody thinks that there's not corruption in DC. And I don't think anybody's naive enough to think that it's simply between one party or the other. Both parties are corrupt. It's the government. I mean, there's corruption everywhere. I mean, where there's power, there's corruption. And DC is a huge, high concentration of power. These people speak for entire states. I mean, especially in the Senate, they speak. Literally, just 2 people are in charge of an entire state. That's kind of crazy. So these people hold a seriously large amount of power. Congress is a very big deal. Congress is very powerful. And they're allowed to hold on to this power for so long. I think that people shouldn't be able to do that. I don't think that that's good for the people holding on to it. I don't think it's good for the people they're responsible for. At the end of the day, power is definitely a very dangerous thing. And if we care enough to look and see, like what's actually happening in Congress, why are these people constantly getting reelected? Is it because of a corrupt system? Is it because of corrupt voting? We don't know. No one looks into it. But I think we should. If you enjoyed this episode, you can give me a thumbs up on YouTube. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can also check out my Instagram at right.this.way.